Right. Well, tonight we're at an interesting transition. We have spent quite a bit of time going through the Lamrim Chenmo, the Lamrim teachings, and we're coming to an end of that, wrapping up. We've had some wonderful discussions on the nature of existence itself, phenomenon, wisdom that liberates. And so we've had this practice of going through, we've had over 30 teachings, literally from how to set up an altar, how to set up a meditation, how to meditate, what to meditate on, and through the whole path, the stages of the path to enlightenment, up to the Mahayana motivation, and path of the Mahayana with what we call six perfections. So we went through each one of those. We went through generosity, through ethics, patience, joyful effort, concentration and wisdom. Wisdom is where we are currently. And so I took a little time today to think about, how to kind of tie that up, and then where do we go? And so the last three teachings have been really about liberation, about wisdom, about the nature of things. And I think that's going to really bring us to a very nice piece around how do we really enter a path, and what's that mean to us? So we've talked about the different levels of motivation. So when we're thinking about our beginner level, our intermediate level, or more advanced level, remember these levels are more relevant to where we are, not that they're inferior or superior in that sense. It's just where we're at. And different parts of the path serve different purposes at different times. And an advanced practitioner still is doing these practices that are very supportive of that we may call a beginner, And so along this, it's that it's a full path, it's a complete path, and even the word path is interesting. There's an idea that if I'm on a path, I'm going somewhere, right? So there's this sort of path, the Lamrim teachings in the sense of accumulation, a path of accumulating merit and wisdom. We achieve our enlightenment in that sense. And then there's this other view of saying there's nowhere to go. It's not a path of achieving or getting anything. It's a matter of discovery, of letting go of misperception, and realizing I'm already, enlightened. So there's these two different approaches, and often within sort of what we call a Dzogchen type teachings, it's much more a path of discovery. It's I'm letting go of all my delusion and labeling and projection, and I'm just I'm recognizing my true nature. So it's more recognizing. So it's really much more about letting go rather than gaining anything. Now, the Lamrim that we've been going through has a lot of emphasis on acquiring knowledge, acquiring merit. And so it's a path of accumulation in that sense. And so they take a very different approach in a sense, but at the same time, are they that different? I've played with this a bit. Are they that different? If we're to enter into what we call a Buddhist path, what makes somebody a Buddhist? What makes somebody what's on a path? And one of my teachers, he talks about a path. A path is, there's somewhere you're going. And often, we don't wind up very long on a path. We tend to get in circles. I try this for a little while. It's pretty good. I kind of like it. It feels good. It resonates with me. I like that. And then, after a while, I stop doing it. Maybe because, like we talked earlier around meditation, I don't really know why I'm doing it. it just felt good. It was beneficial for a time. And then I fall back into my habits, my patterns, and then something happens, and I read another book, I try another thing, and it feels good for a little while, and then I fall back. And so the analogy I use frequently is the marble and the groove, right? The marble in a well-worn groove, my habits, my tendencies, my conditionings, this really strong sense of who I am and how the world is. And every now and then I'll push the marble out, and I'm going to be different. And then, we fall back. And so in that sense, we wind up circular rather than a path again. If we can push that marble out, maybe we can get on a path. Maybe we can go somewhere. And one of the, sort of truths in this sense is that we will get a lot further if we dig one hole 100 feet instead of 100 holes 1 foot deep, right? So we might just have a lot of little holes out there. And so having said all that, well, there's another truth around that. Well, how would you know which path to get on unless you looked around? Right? You want to have a discerning mind. You want to try things out. You want to see what works and what makes sense. So for every lesson we find, we'll also find an alternate sort of view on that. It's not that this is better and that's worse. Things are relevant to where we are and who we are and how we're experiencing things. And that there's a time to dig a few different holes. Because I don't know anything yet. And why would I take the first thing I learned and say, well, that's the path? Then it's not going to be very helpful, right? So there's a time to dig some holes. There's a time to, once you've dug enough holes, to go, well, this is worth investigating, and I'm going to dig a little deeper. And then that makes sense. And if we understand this sort of view, that's where within the context of Lam Rim, we learned early on that there's no contradiction in a teaching. That there's a perspective that's brought up at a specific time for a specific mind stream. That's why there's different levels of motivation. There's different levels of being. And every one of you has your own karma in the way that you have different needs at any specific time than anyone. So there's no cookie cutter, this is what you do. Buddha, roughly they'll say there's like 84,000 mental afflictions, and there's about 84,000 tools for that. So that's a long list. Okay, and within that list, you may address the same type of affliction with a different type of a practice, based on where you're at. So, with this broad range of teachings and tools, this Lam Rim, kind of gave us a guide that says, well, here's where you would fit on paths, and if you're this type of practitioner, this is addressing that need at this point where you're at. So it's kind of like a map. And within that map, we can find some tools that are very appropriate to us. Because we're can be very different places. So what I'm getting at here is to eliminate the idea that there's one right way. But there is an ultimate truth, which is interesting. So to get to the ultimate truth, and there are some basic guidelines, guideposts on our way, maybe would be a good way of putting it. And so our basic working reference point is the Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truths, right? So we are stuck in sort of an unsatisfactory, dissatisfied sense of the conditioned existence that we're in. Okay, and that's just true of everybody and on every level. So there is nothing outwardly in this world that can provide me any lasting happiness. If you find it, let me know. If you find it, let me know. We've been searching. We spent a lot of time, money, and energy finding that, but as long as I'm experiencing this life in this lifetime, I'm going to experience stress, dissatisfaction, uncomfort, I'm going to age. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to lose all my friends. I'm going to lose everybody. They're all going to lose me. This body will come. This body will go. Jobs will come. Jobs will go. I'll get sick. Just this is the nature of things. We live in a very messy world and a conditioned environment. And the things that, I rely upon for happiness and inner peace intrinsically can't provide it. Intrinsically cannot provide it. So this was kind of the basis. The Buddha said, hey, look at this. Do we need to suffer? Okay, and the word that we're using here, suffer, is really from dukkha, which is this more unsatisfactoriness. So, for example, we can be feeling pretty good, so it's not really suffering doesn't work very well, right? I don't feel like I'm suffering when I'm in a jacuzzi with a nice cup of tea. It just doesn't feel like suffering. But I could be in the jacuzzi with a cup of tea and be suffering, couldn't I? Right? Just broke up with somebody, or I just lost my job, or whatever's going on. Or I could physically be in pain too, right? And so it's not the jacuzzi, it's not the hot tea, it's not the outer conditions aren't the source of this stuff. But at the same time, generally, if I'm in that jacuzzi, I'll get a jacuzzi one day. It could happen. So, hot tub, whatever we're in. At that time, it doesn't feel like suffering. But it's interesting at any given point in your life, when you get into these moments that we think of as pleasurable, is it really that in itself is that pleasurable, or is it that at this moment I'm not suffering? Which is just a lack of suffering or a lessened degree of that suffering. And even at that point, can it last, right? What happens if I stay in a jacuzzi too long? It's not going to be that fun after a while, is it? It's going to get hot, and I'm going to turn into a prune. I can't stay there forever. And it'll actually stop feeling good. It will stop feeling good. And then if I don't have a jacuzzi, and I really want a jacuzzi, now I'm suffering. Or if all the things that go along with trying to make things the way I would like them creates a lot of suffering. And the moment we get it, we tend to think, how can I keep it? Right? And now I have a stress again in my life because I want to keep the job. I want to keep, this condition. I want to keep this beautiful memory. I take pictures, I post them, I share them, do everything to keep it alive. And so we can start to notice that we don't really have a lot of inner peace even in the things that we feel pretty good about, because now our mind goes to how do I keep it, preserve it, don't lose it, get more of it. And so I thought, well, okay. So if we start to notice our life a little more objectively, we'll notice that there's a lot of mental and emotional suffering that's really unnecessary. It's unnecessary. I mean, that's basically the deal here. It's unnecessary. The mental and emotional suffering, the sort of truth of suffering, there's a cause for it. There's a cause for it. And so when I use suffering, I like to use the word mental and emotional suffering because I want to distinguish it from physical pain. Okay? Because they're very different. Right? Mental and emotional suffering comes from only one place, my mind. Physical pain, I can think a lot of happy thoughts, but if you hit me with a hammer, it's going to probably hurt. And that's not going to change that physical. So physical pain is something that is a part of this process and conditioned existence. Mental and emotional suffering can only have one source. Right? It can only have one source. Me, my mind. That's the source. There's no outer circumstance, environment, or phenomenon that can cause me mental and emotional suffering. So, understanding this, understanding that, okay, there's the suffering, and then there's the cause of it. Well, what's the cause? And generally, if anyone who's read a Buddhist book, they usually give the answer, anybody. What's attachment? Thank you. Thank you. So we usually say attachment. Attachment's the source of suffering. And so you think about it, right? We suffer because, I love you so much. And so the people who I love a lot, it's funny how much more affected I am when they do something I like or do something I don't like, or, if it's someone I don't know, who cares really? My attachment to that, and attachment to an outcome, attachment to a thing. So within that, though, there's really these three root causes, and the three root causes, attachment is one of them. But when we're talking about, sometimes it's called greediness or attachment, clinging, is it's not all attachment. Okay, so attachment in this context means based on misperception. The real root, the real core root, is misperception. It's a misunderstanding, a not knowing of what's actually happening. And because of my misperception, I become very attached to things, thinking that it'll provide me, happiness it can't, and seeing things in a way that don't exist. So out of my misperception, that's the core, number one. The thing that keeps us trapped in our conditioned samsaric life after life existence is misperception, the core. And based on a misperception and unknowing, there's things I like and things I don't like. So attachment and aversion. Aversion is, just another form of attachment, really. I'm very attached to this not happening. So I have skin in that game as well. So understanding this, that because I don't see things accurately, I have an unrealistic view of the world and what can bring me joy, and an exaggerated view of what's going to be devastating. And because of the misperception and trying to get things go a certain way, I create a lot of karma. I create karma with my thoughts, my speech, my action. And that ultimately plants all the seeds, which leads to the experience of a life that we have. It's a vicious cycle. It's not a path. It's a circle. And so this body will come, this body will go, and based on how I've lived it, the seeds I've planted karmically in the imprint of my consciousness, which goes from life to life, based on how I've lived it, things appear differently in my life. And I see myself differently, I see you differently. And so the Buddha looked at all this, and said, well, if you eliminate the cause, maybe you won't suffer. How about we see things accurately? And so you got the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation. Cessation says there's no cause, there's no result. How are you going to have a result without a cause? So if there's no misperception, how can suffering exist in that sense? And then there's the path, the Eightfold Path to see clearly, basically. And that Eightfold Path, made up of three basic categories: ethics, concentration, wisdom. And ethics, concentration, wisdom are the way that we can. It's a framework from which we can engage in the world in a way that's more productive and more meaningful, and ultimately eliminates suffering, mental and emotional suffering. So we don't need to suffer anymore. So these are kind of the tools. Now, everything I've said to this point, except that consciousness goes from life to life, any human can pretty much agree with. If you investigate, you will note that our mental and emotional suffering comes from our mind, not an outside source. So let's start there. Is that true? Is that true? So we would say that the cause of something is the same stuff. Okay, same stuff. Right? So we use the analogy a lot for those who've been around for a little bit. What's the cause of a tree? Is it the soil? Is it the sun? Is it the rain? Is it the fertilizer? Can all those cause a tree? No. Right? Those are conditions. The real cause of a tree is the seed. The seed is the cause of a tree. You can have all those conditions, no seed, no tree, right? The real cause is tree. So it's the same stuff. The seed grows into a tree. It's the same stuff. And then the tree, goes and other seeds come. That's the cause. The environment, the soil, the water, all those other things, are the conditions for that seed to grow. It's the conditions from which things arise. The tree arises. Well, if we think about our mind, same thing. I need to have the seeds of anger in my mind, the seeds of these emotions and mental states are in my consciousness, and the conditions are out there. But if I don't have the seed of anger doesn't come. The condition for the anger can come, but the seed, no anger, right? And so, if we start to understand this truth that where is my mental and emotional suffering? Where is it? It's only one place, right? My mind. And it manifests in my body. But ultimately it's in my mind. So I can feel tight, I can feel the tension, I can hold it here, but it's in my mind. And we can really easily kind of get this if we just look at any situation in our life, and notice that if you take the same situation and you look at it differently, your emotions change, your sense of it changes, everything changes, right? Right? The worst day in your life could become the best day in your life, right? I lost that job, it was terrible. Oh, I got this new job. I wouldn't have got this new job if I hadn't lost that job. In my case, it's if you look at it your whole life, really, the painful situations in your life are the times you grew the most. So at the time, it felt terrible. Later, that allowed me to show up and start changing my life. Oh, okay, that was a pretty good day. At the time, felt like a bad day. What's changed is my perspective. So I look at things different. I can see it more accurately, maybe. So if we start to understand that my mental and emotional suffering is in my mind, it's not out there. Well, then we can start maybe seeing a little more accurately. So on this basic premise says, if within Buddhism, he said, well, if there's no seed, so if I see clearly, then anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, etc., all these things cannot arise. That they are based upon a misperception about reality, and my mind's confused. So then you got to say, well, is that true? You got to investigate that a little bit. So that's where we've had these talks the last three weeks on phenomenon, on what we call emptiness or voidness, the nature of reality, the nature of myself and things in the world. And we kind of broke down how we see things inaccurately, right? My favorite green cup. Does my favorite green cup intrinsically exist? No. No such thing. My favorite green cup is a mental construct. It exists nowhere but my mind. Right? We've gone through this for 3 weeks. I don't want to keep going there, but if we start to understand what does exist, right? I'm grasping onto something, and there is a valid basis of designation. Sorry, that bangs through there. So, a valid basis of designation does exist. There's something here. There's something here that I label a cup. Does a cup exist intrinsically? No. That's a mental construct. Again, it's in our mind that a cup. This is not inherently or intrinsically a cup. A cat's going to see it totally different. A dog will see it differently. I can use it in a variety of different ways and can turn it into a vase, all kinds of things. But it's a cup because you and I call it a cup. And we call it a cup based on a mental construct. Actually, you might call it a mug because it's big, right? So it's not a cup, it's a mug. And then the idea of my cup. You know, when does it become my cup and when does it stop being my cup? And is that anywhere, really, except our minds? If I die and it's no longer my cup? Or, actually, is it really my cup? No, it's the center's cup, really, I think. But I'm using it right now. And does the center intrinsically own a cup? You know, I mean, no. So what we start to understand is that the world that we live in has a lot of phenomenon, but how I see it and label it and perceive it is mostly a mental construct. And if I change that more accurately, I can just start to understand that I'm pretty much coloring the coloring book. Yeah, that's a good analogy. The world we live in is like an empty coloring book. There's a lot of phenomena out there, but I get to color it in. What I don't realize is I've already colored it in. Okay? So when I find someone attractive or interesting, and I think that's an attractive, interesting person, is that true? No. What's true is I'm experiencing them as attractive and interesting. That's more accurate. And how did they become that to me? They became that to me based on my karma and how I've lived my life, that I had a pleasurable experience or see someone in a certain way. And so if I start to understand that the world I'm living in is much more of a blank slate, an empty coloring book that I've colored in, I can start to recognize that all of this is subjective, relational, and changeable. And my experience of it changes based on how I live my life and the level of clarity I have about how things work. So if we examine all of our mental and emotional sufferings, what we challenge is that we will find that trace them down, they're going to be based on a misperception. Okay. So what are the three basic misperceptions? There's three marks of existence, is how the world actually is, right? How it actually is. And if you look at why you're angry, why you're frustrated, why you're scared, why you're all that, it's going to inevitably trace to misperceiving the world, and usually in one of these three ways, because this is the way the world is. So the phenomenal world that we live in, number one, is impermanent. It's changing all the time. It's changing all the time. And we spend a lot of time and energy trying to not let it change. I don't want my job to change. I don't want my house to change. I don't want, my car to break down. I don't want things to change. I just don't. Other things I want to change a lot, and they don't ever seem to change. But what's happening is things are changing. Everything's impermanent. Your relationships are impermanent. Everything's impermanent. Everything's changing all the time. And you will notice there's a lot of suffering around that. Even your plan for the day, you might need to change it. And we'll have a lot of suffering trying to make it go the way I had it planned. I had an appointment. It was supposed to be like this. And now it's different. And some things about ourselves, and actually I'll save this for the third one, because that's an important part of it. But things are impermanent, and you'll notice that we struggle with that, because we don't want our job to change. I don't want to get a new boss. I don't want my relationship to change. I don't want my house to deteriorate. I don't want earthquake. There's just change, and my body is certainly not what it used to be, and it's changing. So if you start looking at frustration, anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, and you may trace it to things are changing, and I'm struggling with that. I keep trying to make things permanent. I got locks on my door. I've got the maintenance on my car. One of my fascinating, real good analogies around here is I just love it when I go to some town, any town. It can even be a big city. It could be like even, friends from New York. And I'll say, hey, it's, great out here. And they'll go, yeah, it's not like it used to be. The good old days, it used to be really, don't we all think that? Yeah, carbon, it's not like it used to be, friends in New York, the good old days, it used to be. No, it's not. Things change, and we change. And we struggle with that, and we hang on to some idea that, I can keep things, I can preserve things. So the other is just unsatisfactoriness, right? The unsatisfactory nature of things, that something outside of myself can provide me lasting happiness. Good luck. Good luck. That is the really heartfelt, prevalent, amazing delusion. That if you guys would just all straighten up and act right and give me the job that I really want, my life could be okay. And if I could just rearrange everything and everyone was just so, then I could be happy. So I really wish you'd buck up, because, I'm unhappy right now. But if this was different, or if that was different. And the delusion also, the counterpoint to that is the delusion that my suffering is coming from somewhere else. Right? It's because of how they treated me or how somebody talked to me. And the idea that, and we just spend, we can talk all day long, and all of us have heard, happiness inside job, it's not out there. But where do we look for it? All day long, from the moment we wake up. Out there, right? What's my vacation going to be like? What am I going to do today? How am I going to do this? What's going to be fun? That's what we do all day long. Rather than understanding that, my mind and what I do is more important than the events themselves. So this is a really strong misperception. This is the source of a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of mental and emotional pain, is thinking that, that vacation is going to be all that, or this thing's going to be all that. And it comes, it goes, it could be great, and then guess what? We're still subject to being angry, frustrated, resentful. Even after the vacation of a lifetime. I love that line. I find it fascinating. You guys heard me say a lot. Yeah, the vacation of a lifetime. And yet I'm still subject to being frustrated or nervous or angry, which is weird because I had a vacation of a lifetime. It came, it went, and I'm still me, and it's now Wednesday. And that didn't intrinsically change my life in any unalterable way. But it felt good. It was nice while it lasted. Now I'm looking for the next vacation of a lifetime. Hopefully it will come soon, because I want to be happy. And so that cycle is just a problem. And then the big misperception is the misperception of myself. John, this thing I call John. Talk about labels. John has a green cup he likes. John is a morning person. John is like this. I have these personality traits, and I think that I'm the same person today as I was yesterday. And I'll tell you what I'm like. I like it when you read. Many years ago, this would take me back to probably around the year 2000. It's about 15 years ago, maybe. Tried internet dating. And I found it fascinating because they have you write a blurb about yourself, right? And everybody else writes a blurb about themselves. And it's funny how we see ourselves. If you write about yourself, I'm this kind of person. And I noticed is I tended to write the kind of person I would like to be. Right? I didn't write what I was, and I thought, I bet you other people are doing the same thing, but it was it was so starkly clear to me at that point, because you want to present an authentic you, because but I'm this kind of person. And what I noticed is I wrote about the qualities I would like to really have, but that's not really what I was doing, right? Kind, loving, patient person who can be angry, impatient, and frustrated. That would be more accurate. How about a impatient, struggling person who would like to be patient, loving, and kind? I don't know. That might have been more accurate. And so we carry a perception of ourselves with us day to day, and it seems really solid, and it interacts with the world in a pretty solid way, and we get stuck in habits and tendencies, and that's a misperception. What we forget is that we are constantly changing, and the piece, when I noticed, I wrote this last night in a little thing that we do every day, is things that don't seem to change. You notice there's certain habits about yourself that don't change. And we do things to reinforce those habits. I am like this. And so I do more, to reinforce that. Well, that actually is changing. It's actually getting stronger. And that's a change. This habit is getting stronger. It's changing. It's getting stronger. So even the things that I think aren't changing, a view about myself, like let's say, I don't think I'm a good dancer, which we all know is incorrect. But if I hold that view and then I don't dance, and every time songs come up, I tell myself, I'm reinforcing that belief gets stronger. So it's actually changing. It's deepening and strengthening. So even things that don't appear to change do change. They can get stronger, or things can lessen. Go out on the dance floor and prove people wrong. You'd be surprised. But most of that experience is that we forget that we're changing all the time, and that our skills and abilities can grow and change, and I can create new habits, new things to do. As a matter of fact, science has now demonstrated very clearly I can create new neural pathways, I can create more brain density, I can literally create new habits and tendencies, and that the person that I would like to be, I can actually cultivate those, and that can become my new habits. I can actually consciously do that. That's just straight up science. So everything that we're talking about here, again, with the exception of what I alluded to earlier, was the idea of lifetime to lifetime. Just in this lifetime, we'll notice it's just fundamentally true. It's accurate. And everything along those lines doesn't designate anything a Buddhist. You're going to find the same thing in Plato. You're going to find the same thing from, philosophers, the wisdom. I mean, just the nature of things. That my mental and emotional suffering comes from, my interaction with the world and my views and heartfelt beliefs and perceptions of it, interacting with what's happening. That's universally true. And so if we start to recognize this, what I want to do is start seeing the world more accurately. Okay? And at this point, we think, well, I can really think that person's annoying. That's not true, right? The person's not intrinsically annoying. I can really think that the source of my suffering is out there. That's not true. That same person, on any given day, I might find pleasurable or I might find annoying. They might help me when I'm hurt, and now they're kind and generous. They might hurt me, and they were my best friend yesterday. They're not intrinsically any of those things. They're not annoying, they're not bad, they're not good. They're interdependent, which is more accurate, with what's going on in any given moment, what I'm bringing to any given moment, what they're doing at any given moment, and it's changing. There's an interdependence. But primarily, my perception tends to be that they are like this, I am like this, and that's right and that's wrong, and my day will be good if, and I have good days. I have long days. Right? I mean, they're all 24 hours, but somehow I have long days. And again, mind, right? Mind misperception. So how we relate to it. So the world is actually subjective and relational, but we make it hard and concrete. And we make people idiots and jerks and funny and attractive and ugly and all that, as though that's how they actually are, which isn't true. Right? Which isn't true. It's subjective. So Buddhism says, well, at the base, if I was to enter into a path, again, everything that we've shared, nothing has to be Buddhist at this point, except, so I'll just take the life-to-life thing out, and we'll just be talking here to say, how can I not suffer? Which is basically said. If you start seeing more accurately, are you going to stop projecting attachments to things that don't exist? Like my favorite cup. Right? It's a bunch of clay and silica. And if it breaks, could I potentially still be happy? Possibly. Right. If I have the vacation of a lifetime, could I still be unhappy? Yes. So basically the view here becomes a misperception that these 8 worldly dharmas are how to live life. And that's the source of our mental and emotional suffering. So the 8 worldly dharmas. And so we choose that without questioning how things appear. And in fact, instead of eliminating our suffering, we create the cause of more suffering. Because I get more attached. And I have more aversion. And I keep working on principles that don't work. Inherently thinking this person's, this way and I'm this way. And this job will make it. And if I get this college degree, it'll all be better. And all those things that we tell ourselves in a conventional way. So when we enter into a path, and I'm not even going to call it a Buddhist path at this point. Everything that we've said, so we know that there's dissatisfaction, we know that there's suffering, we know that there's impermanence, and we know that we misperceive of how we are. I'll guarantee you'll sell yourself short on whatever you think you are or are not. It's interesting. You have abilities you don't even know about because you never tried. You don't even think about it, or you might have a limited experience in an area. But our mind is much more of a river, and each, the old saying, you don't enter the same river, same stream twice, right? It's moving. I'm different. I've learned more than I knew a minute ago. My mind, it's this flow. And so I keep thinking I'm the same person, but it's changing, and I'm changing, and my knowledge is changing. My opinions are changing, views are changing, my knowledge, all that's changing. So my mind stream's much more of a river than a bottle of fluid. It's a river, it's moving. That's just the way things are. So if I start operating like this, maybe, let's see if attachment and aversion arise in the same way, which creates the same kind of problems. And so here's the point where I want to get to, is that to enter a Buddhist path, and a Buddhist path in a sense is directed at one thing only. Only one thing. To see things accurately, that's all. Truth, the true nature. Dharma, the ultimate Dharma is the nature of how things are. Your true nature, the nature of things, to recognize that. The Buddhist principle is that if you recognize that, you will no longer do a bunch of stupid things that create karma. Because why would you? If you know that sticking your hand on a fire hurts, you're not going to do it anymore. If you see how things work, you're going to stop creating suffering. And so if you recognize this, so this is this piece where you come into renunciation. Renunciation. So the Buddhist path, they talk about these 5 levels of mind, 5 paths. which lead to this ultimate enlightenment, the entry point at all of them is renunciation. So renunciation. And I'm going to present it, again, in just a way, whether someone's Buddhist or not Buddhist. Renunciation. A renunciant is not someone who cannot enjoy a good meal. Right? Dalai Lama enjoys a good meal. A renunciant is not someone who doesn't enjoy good company or can enjoy a hot tub. Enjoy a hot tub and be a renunciant. Matter of fact, when I was a monk and I visited Thai forest monks up in Northern California, they had a sauna all off the grid. It's really nice. They assured me that it's traditional. I said, yeah, if you're in Thailand, they take good care of their body. So you can enjoy that. It's not, that isn't what, so, my prayer beads aren't spiritual. Right? My, Dharma books, my statues, What's spiritual is my mind. It's what I do with the prayer beads. It's what I do with the Dharma. And when we start to understand that, we start understanding that, what is it that a renunciant, what is it that they renounce? Now, typically I was a monk. We were called renunciants. And we have, a couple sets of robes and a bowl and, very few belongings. And we live a simple life. They call it renunciate. But what do you really renounce? Do you renounce a good time? Do you renounce the jacuzzi? What you're ultimately renouncing is the delusion. The misperceiving way of seeing the world, that my happiness is going to come from somewhere out there. That's what you renounce. You renounce the delusion of the three misperceptions. You renounce the inaccurate way of seeing the world, that these 8 worldly dharmas are going to be the way to go. And you start, so that's the ultimate thing, is to renounce delusion. My mind tells me a lot of stories. It tells me stories all day long that don't really hold in the inherent truth. And so, if I am to really enter into a path to remove suffering in my life, mental and emotional suffering, again, not even being a Buddhist, how about if I start living with clarity and wisdom in my life and make choices that do not create more suffering and make choices that alleviate suffering? Well, that's a pretty good starting point. So that's where we dig a little hole and we go, well, let's try that. Let me recognize that there are no annoying people in the world. Right? Here they come. They look annoying. But my mind is going to say they're really annoying. Can I challenge that and say, they are not inherently annoying. I am annoyed. Right? Based on what they're saying or doing, or how they're dressed. Okay, that's more accurate, right? And that's a different shift. Well, then again, you recognize the next thing. You are not annoyed, are you? You're experiencing some sensations that we call annoying, which will come and go. But they're not me. So now, it's more accurate. This person appeared, I experienced some feelings that I'm calling annoying, and they came and they went. That's a very different experience than every time I see so-and-so, I'm already annoyed because I know they're annoying. I'm annoyed, and if I could just get rid of them, it would change. And then, what do I do to get rid of them? I lie. Well, what kind of karma am I creating? So we start doing all these things that don't really address the core problem. The core problem is my suffering and my annoyingness comes from I would love that person to be different than they are. Or it could be I didn't get enough sleep. Or it could be, a lot of things going on in my life. Or they remind me of somebody. But all that's in my mind. The annoyance in my mind is not out there. That same annoying person, I find out that they just lost their beloved, spouse. All of a sudden, they're not so annoying. Where'd that go? I find something out. As a matter of fact, if you get to know somebody, anybody, you get to know their struggles, their challenges, their pain, it's funny how unannoying they become. So you can see how we mislabel, and then based on the label, we develop some views and perceptions, and then that triggers our emotions, and we keep pointing it out there instead of understanding the real mechanisms in here. And that if I can recognize this person as another human being who, just like me, is trying to find happiness, just like me, is trying to avoid suffering, just like me, has known sadness, despair, pain, and suffering, just like me, is trying to get their needs met, and just like me, learning how to live. Well, that's more accurate. Much more accurate. And it's a totally different shift with how I relate to the person. So I start to understand that if I work with my mind to see more accurately, I'm going to be less triggered. Less triggered by people, places, and events. I'll understand that the meal itself is not going to give me lasting happiness. But I can enjoy the heck out of it while it's here. So again, it's not that I don't enjoy it. I enjoy it, but I know that I have this experience and it's temporary. And when I have no food, any food's pretty good. When I have a lot of food and a lot of choices, what happens? We get pickier. And then the food I used to like is not so interesting anymore. That's all my mind, right? It's not the circumstances. It's how I'm relating to them. It's how I'm relating to them. Is it Leo Tolstoy? Is it Tolstoy? I think it's Tolstoy. It says, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. And this says, well, if you change yourself, you change the world. You change your experience of it. And it's much more accurate as to how the world operates and who you are. So the path of Buddhism is looking at the real source of our suffering, of mental and emotional suffering, not pain, mental and emotional suffering. And noting that the real source of any really strong emotional or mental suffering, anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, fear, depression, you're going to find is an attachment to an outcome. I really wanted something to be like this, and it's not. Or I fear that it won't be. And that attachment to that outcome is based in a belief that if this happens, I'm going to have some kind of real lasting happiness. Which, by the way, is not true. And you don't need to be a Buddhist, again. This is just Harvard science research. Which basically, interestingly enough, they say major events like getting a college degree, getting an award, getting a divorce, losing a job, getting married, etc. If it happened more than 3 months ago, it has almost no impact on your level of well-being today. That's pretty significant because we really think all that stuff's super important for my lasting happiness. And it's not. And that's just science. That's just science. You don't need to be a Buddhist. So where we're wrapping up to and unfolding today is that having gone through the Lam Rim and we start to see how these paths interwork and relate, how about we really make good use of these teachings in a way that can eliminate suffering in our own lives and benefit others. And so entering the paths starts with renunciation. How about we start renouncing the causes of our suffering, which is a misunderstanding about ourselves and the world we live in. Misguided attachment and an aversion to people, places, and things in our lives. Because where your real inner peace, well-being comes from, and this is again, not just generally human, really comes from doing things you feel good about. Being the person you'd like to be. Like those values, that person I described in my, I don't even remember what the site was back then. It was big back then. Match.com. The person I would like to be, and then who I was. Well, I bet if I started actually living like the person I'd like to be, I'd feel a whole lot more inner peace, well-being, and tranquility. But my actions didn't match what I want to be, right? I want to be kind and compassionate, and I get angry and frustrated. Something's wrong here. So, at the core of all of that is me really being the most important person in the room, because I am the center of the universe, right? And I know you guys think you are, but you're wrong. Okay. So we have 7 billion centers of the universe going around bumping into each other. It gets to be a problem, and it creates a lot of suffering, rather than recognizing there's a universe that we're a part of, and that how I interact and perceive in it is related to all of you. And, you know, we've unpacked these teachings on interdependence. And so, you know, I guess the main key takeaway is that I'm inviting you. I'm inviting you to become a renunciant. To begin a path. To begin a path. It could be a path of discovery of what you already are. It could be a path of accumulation. But let's make it a path instead of a marble in a groove. Instead of an interesting, fascinating talk I heard one day, or a retreat that made me feel good, or whatever. That I begin a path and a journey. One that says, I would like to live in reality. I would like to stop suffering. I'd like to be of benefit to others. With renunciant, with the Mahayana, we're going to bring in the great compassion of bodhicitta, which is the engine. But right now, just inviting you to explore the idea of beginning a path, of renouncing delusional thinking. You know, it's funny, when we see insane people, we want to get them help. But when I'm insane, I cherish it. Right? I cherish it. As if eating that extra piece of pie is just not going to have a result. Because, you know, it's just apple pie. So, the invitation here is that as we leave today, to start just seeing things more accurately, understanding that you experience things in a subjective way, and that any event, anything that you experience, you could look at it a little differently and have a totally different experience. But to do this with a discerning and clear mind, which doesn't mean I pretend that harmful things are not harmful, right? We're not saying that. We're saying there's healthier decisions and unhealthier decisions based on reality. And some of the things that we do, even to become pleasurable, are very short-term and forget the long-term view. So, and the things that we see and the way we label people, we want to remember that they change, that they will not provide us any super lasting happiness or pain, and that you're changing and you can become totally different. Today's the first day of the rest of your life. I mean, for me, I find that amazing that as Tenzin Priyadarshi, the Venerable Lama who's going to come here, he says, I am only human is nothing but self-imposed limitation. Nothing but a self-imposed limitation. That you have all the enlightened qualities already. And when I say I'm only human, that's a self-imposed limitation that we can change. You've all gotten better at a lot of things, haven't you? And whatever you practice, you get better at. You can change. I find that quite empowering. Okay. So let's go ahead and do our dedication. So we can dedicate the virtue and wisdom we have accumulated here today for the benefit of all beings. Let us dedicate the virtue and wisdom that we have accumulated both here today and throughout our lives, both individually and collectively. We dedicate this for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. And may we be able to use the merit and wisdom we've accumulated here today and throughout our lives to purify our own minds, to develop a clear mind, a mind of renunciation and bodhicitta, so that we can become enlightened for the benefit of all beings. All right, well, thank you all so much. It's good to be with you, and if you can make it Saturday, try to go visit our website and sign up. And be well and try to stay out of trouble. Yeah. And if you get angry, resentment, jealousy, frustrated, trace it down. See what's up.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Good to see you.